The decision was momentous. It would publicly have the church defend the Jews. So he did make a decision. He began his papacy in early 39 by burying this document. It is now known to historians as the hidden encyclical. And the French guards tried to block her gaining entrance into the camp. She forced her way past them. She refused to leave without the children. She remains in the camp for the next few days, badgering the guards until the director of the French Red Cross came and negotiated with the French officials to let the children leave. They were let go a few hours before they would have been shipped to Auschwitz, because the Vatican stalled for 10 months, at which point the Commission simply gave up and suspended its work. The Vatican responded by accusing the Jewish members of the Commission of conducting a defamatory campaign against the Church. The International Red Cross makes it a practice to send all of its records to the headquarters in Geneva as soon as practical after each case is closed, making it impossible for the investigation to continue along those lines here. It is the opinion of this writer that an examination of those records in Geneva of all passports issued by the International Red Cross would reveal startling and unbelievable facts. Then Rabbi Herzog raised his head and looked at the young men gathered before him, and he said, "I cannot save those thousands of Jewish children, but I ask of you, how are you going to help rebuild the Jewish people?"
Welcome to History for the Curious. I'm Menno Reisner, and I host the internationally renowned lecturer, dynamic historian, and tour guide, Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch. Experience our history, confront dilemmas, and reveal the untold stories of 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, from Paris to Cairo, from the Russian Tsar to Maimonides, and from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution. Join the fastest growing Jewish history podcast in the world by subscribing to this channel and discovering the events that have shaped us into who we are today.
Let's, for a moment, analyse the idea that Pius XII's silence was motivated by his belief that if he were to denounce the Nazis' campaign, he would be encouraging Hitler to carry out even worse actions against Europe's Jews. Let's look at just one example. What did the Germans do to the Danish Lutheran Church when it publicly declared a national struggle in defence of the Jews, as we saw last week? What did it do? Nothing. And what happened to the Jews in Denmark? They were saved, all 7,000 who were taken to Sweden. So here you have a model of successful action against annihilation of the Jews that Pius XII's defenders chose not to mention. And by the way, what took place in Denmark was about 3 weeks before the Jews in Rome were rounded up and deported. If the Catholics in Italy had followed the Danes' lead, even just in verbal condemnation, how many Jews would have been saved? So the fact is that in those dark years, there were Christian church leaders, besides the Danes, including French Catholic bishops, the Orthodox Bulgarian Synod of Bishops, who publicly denounced the Germans. And there is every reason to believe that these protests helped save Jews' lives, and no indication that they caused more Jews' deaths. All the Jews living within the borders of pre-war Bulgaria, for example, which was 50,000, survived the war in the face of protests of the king as well. It wasn't just the church, but nevertheless, they survived. And there is more. The Pope's predecessor, Pius XI, wrote a draft encyclical called On the Unity of the Human Race. The text condemned antisemitism explicitly and called for an end to the persecution of Jews. It said, the struggle of racial purity ends up by being the struggle against Jews. This Nazi struggle is no different in motive and method from persecutions everywhere carried out against the Jews since antiquity. And that is quite an admission from the Church. It's true that the encyclical still denounced the religion of Judaism. It was wrong in its beliefs, but not the Jews. That's a different story. So you have here a pope drawing a direct connection in motive and method between past persecutions of the Jews, and therefore by implication the Church's persecution of the Jews, and of the Germans' current assault of the Jews. But he died. The Pope died before it was published. So Pius XII took up office in early 1939, and he had a big decision to make what to do with this draft encyclical. The decision was momentous. It would publicly have the church defend the Jews. So he did make a decision. He began his papacy in early 39 by burying this document. It is now known to historians as the hidden encyclical, even in fact on Wikipedia. And he buried it in the archives. And then the Vatican, for another half a century, tried to hide his act of suppression and the encyclical itself. Now, we mentioned that the archives were opened in 2020. They were so revealing that Germany's Council of Catholic Bishops in 2020 issued a statement. They wrote, "Inasmuch as the bishops did not oppose the war with a clear no, and most of them bolstered the German nation's will to endure, they have made themselves complicit in the war. The bishops may not have shared the Nazis' racial ideology, but their words and images gave backing to the regime."
So what is his motivation to be silent?
We touched on it last week. He was scared of the success of communism and scared to push the Nazis, at least until late 42. But nevertheless, to say nothing, to express no anguish for the deaths of millions of civilians, of women and children. Don't risk your life, but join the Allies, sign a declaration to condemn mass murder. Nothing.
What about the bishops in Germany? Were they quiet too?
During the war?
Yeah.
So yes, they did not protest, which, by the way, was in stark contrast to a number of bishops during the war attacking the Germans' euthanasia program, which killed the mentally and physically infirm. So, as an example, in a public sermon in August 41, the German Bishop Clement August von Galen publicly condemned this program of mass murder. And Cardinal Faulhaber declared, "As a Catholic bishop, I may not remain silent when the preservation of the moral foundations of all public order is at stake."
That didn't extend to the mass murder of Jews.
Yeah, that's apparently not an assault on the moral foundations of all public order.
Do you think Hitler would have proceeded with his genocidal plans? Let's say the Pope had openly opposed him, made a big noise.
He would without a doubt have pursued the murder of the Jews as he did.
So effectively, what's the difference? It sounds just like we're upset that there hasn't been support, but did it have a practical difference?
No, not at all. Had there been high-level international criticism, it would have created a number of differences. Firstly, it would have forced Hitler to be more circumspect in some of his actions. Nazis couldn't have arrested 1,500 Jews under the Pope's window in Rome. Also, Jews would have actually been saved, either by the average priest feeling it was his Christian duty to do more, something more, or perhaps by stirring the moral guilty conscience of the people carrying out the atrocities in the Einsatzgruppen. Let's put it this way. Would at least 600 Jews have saved the Holocaust? That's 1/100th of 1%. Look at the church in Athens, the church in Denmark, the church in Bulgaria. They saved thousands. 600 Jews saved is an entire Kehillah alive at the end of the war. And that's on the Vatican's conscience as far as I'm concerned. And for me, the outcome is that even though nowadays the church is a far less powerful voice generally than it has been, but it can no longer say a word of criticism against Israel when Jewish lives are in danger, as for instance they are at the moment in Israel. The Vatican has lost the moral authority to speak about Jews. Full stop. Now we come to an even deeper element of infidelities. As the ghettos were being liquidated, the number of children, Jewish children, ending up in convents grew. Some of them were very young. They were infants who'd been separated from their parents, willingly or otherwise. Also, the Jewish parents of quite a few children had initially turned them over to Christian families for shelter and paid for this, but the benefactors pocketed the money and got rid of the children by deserting them in the streets or handing them over to convents. And then you had older girls, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, who'd basically been roving about in villages working for peasants, but at one stage their difficulties and their employers' abuse prompted them to seek shelter in convents.
But after the war, the convent leaders, I don't think they ever disclosed that they had Jewish children in their institutions, at least not officially.
Generally, they did not. And that's, in fact, what I want to come to. In June 1945, the major French children's relief organization estimated, it is, as you say, it's an estimation, it's a guess, that in France alone there were some 1,200 Jewish children in non-Jewish families or institutions, and a much larger amounts were assumed to be in Poland, in the Netherlands, and other countries. Now, sometimes the secrecy was done because even if the nuns knew that these children were Jewish, they didn't record them in the church records as such during the war for security reasons. But there was a sinister religious reason after the war. In Catholic belief, although it's illegal under normal circumstances to baptize a child against parental wishes, once a child is baptized, whether legally or illegally, this baptism is considered valid and church doctrine has to be followed. Now, we are aware, all of us know, that there were Rabbonim, there were activists after the war, who, in an effort to save Jewish children, went into convents and monasteries and, they shouted out at dinner time, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And they waited to see which little children would automatically raise their hands and place it over their eyes, because their mothers had taught them to do so when they were being put to sleep in the days before the darkness came. And then these Rabbonim would plead or bribe the institution to return those kids, or sometimes literally kidnap them to save them. We know of Rabbi Eliezer Silver, of Rav Herzog, of Shlomo Baumgartner, and many others.